started. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kapil Thangavelu. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Stacklet and the creator and lead maintainer for Cloud Custodian. I'm super excited that all of you were able to join us today for the first Cloud Custodian Day ever. I'm looking forward to our great lineup of speakers. George?
And I'm Jorge Castro. I'm the community manager for Cloud Custodian. This is my first event/conference in this new role, so I'm really excited to be here. And when Kapil and I were thinking about talk ideas, we thought, wouldn't it be great if we just told the community where we are, where we've been, and where we're going? So, Kapil.
So, yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit about what we've done over the past year, where we are today, and look forward to what our roadmap is for the project going forward as we look into 2022. But first, I thought it'd be useful to do a little bit of background around governance as code and Cloud Custodian itself. So a brief intro for those of you who are potentially unfamiliar with it. Governance as code, governance itself as a word can mean many different things. We use it to represent both security, compliance, as well as operations, cost optimization, really a whole manner of things intended to be all the grab bag of the things that you need to do to operate your cloud at scale and be well managed. And looking at what does it mean to do governance as code? Well, fundamentally, we would have to write a policy. We choose to use a declarative, simple language in the same way that we've used Terraform and CloudFormation to do infrastructure as code. We then...
Is that a train?
That is an ambulance outside. Apologies. And then we, off of those policies, we commit them to a Git repo. And in the process of doing that, they go through code review, they go through CI and testing, and finally they're deployed out to the actual cloud environment to enable real-time enforcement around detection, remediation, notification around any issues within that cloud environment. So if we look at what Cloud Custodian is, it's an open source rules engine for achieving cloud governance. And it uses a YAML DSL for querying resources, being able to find the interesting set of those resources through arbitrary filtering and then taking actions. And it has a vocabulary of resources, filters, actions that constitutes hundreds, or in some cases, across all of the providers, thousands of different Lego bricks that you can use to assemble your policies for your needs. It's very context-free. It's a simple CLI. You can use it as an interactive querying tool. It scales from small startups to some of the largest enterprises in the world. And it's really designed to help drive that behavior change, to not just be a big wall of red, but to help you actually change the behaviors, affect the remediation, tell developers if there's something happening, that they've done something wrong in real time as they're doing it. So let's take a quick look at the anatomy of the policy. So a policy targets a particular resource type, in this case in AWS EBS volume. It has an execution mode. Now, Custodian has dozens of execution modes, and they're really one of two types. They're either a pull-based execution, where we go and query the resources, or they're event-based, in which case Custodian actually has integrated provisioning for the different cloud providers to provision a policy with that cloud provider serverless runtime, hook up the event sources to that policy such that it executes whenever an interesting event happens. And Custodian is able to derive a lot of its power from its ability to do this on top of the API calls. So as API calls are creating or modifying resources in the environment, that Custodian policies can then introspect what those API calls are doing and validate that the resources being created or modified are compliant to the organization's policies. Next, we have a set of filters. Now, filters can be simple attribute-based filters like the ones here, or they can be complex filters that look at, say, the IAM permissions for a resource or the network security groups for a resource. So related attributes corresponding to that particular resource's configuration. And then finally, for the resources that match on these filters, we'll take a set of actions. And actions can, in this case, we're going to look for an EM that's attached and used, and in this context, copy the tags from the instance onto the volume. So this list of vocabularies of actions and filters allow you to combine in arbitrary ways to affect whatever policies you may want in your environment, be it notification driven, be it remediation, complex workflows around resources, everything from off hours to managing encryption. And I'm sure we'll hear lots of great use cases through the presentations today.
All right. And a quick state of the community as far as volume. I know a lot of people have been asking, how big is the environments that you're using Cloud Custodian in and things like that. So I decided to do a little bit of my own digging around how you all are using Cloud Custodian. So downloads have increased. So I went and I looked at all the activity in GitHub and all of our mirrors and things like that over the past year. And downloads have increased over 4 times from this time last year. And we're now easily over 1 million downloads a month of Cloud Custodian, and over 60 million total downloads over the life cycle of the project. And as you can see here, and you've probably been watching the news and things like that, things like compliance and supply chain security are on top of everyone's minds. So we just thought we'd like to share with the community that, yeah, we see the excitement, and you can see it as more people have started to participate in the community in events such as this today. Over 550 individuals have collaborated on GitHub and Cloud Custodian so far, and 313 of those have committed code. Over the past calendar year, we've had about 280 issues opened and about 241 closed. I'm kind of using that as a number to see how active some of you are on GitHub as far as filing issues, or maybe you have a problem that you can't figure out. Sometimes people just default to asking a question on GitHub. We do pay attention to those, and just to kind of give you an idea of the activity that we have there. And almost 4,000 stargazers. So in GitHub, when you click on a little star there, it's just an easy way to see who's bookmarking your project, who's interested in it. And we've seen growth there over 20%, at 22% this year alone. And we do like to release early and often. So we've had 7 stable releases over the past year, and we're due for our 8th here probably next month at some point after KubeCon. And our community is diverse. There's over 16 different countries represented by the contributors of Cloud Custodian. That's 2 more than the current F1 grid, which makes me proud. So it's good to see all this activity. And if you can go into GitHub yourself, you'll definitely see people contributing PRs, filing issues, and we try to keep the community updated on all of these events, which I'll get to in a little bit. But first, let's go into some of the status of the actual software itself, because I know some of you are kind of wondering from a 10,000-foot view what has changed and the major aspects of Cloud Custodian over the past year.
So one of the ones that I'm really excited about, it was one that was a blocker for our 1.0 release. Cloud Custodian is used in lots of unattended environments at scale. And we really have as a project, taken a strong view towards compatibility with policy. So policy you may have written 5 years ago actually still runs today. But as we drive to 1.0, we've picked up a lot of syntax that potentially doesn't make sense anymore. And we want to start being able to deprecate that over time. So one of the major contributions for the past year was a policy deprecation framework, which allows us to say around particular syntax that this is no longer sort of the best practice. And you can validate that as part of the custodian validate command. You can actually see the deprecation warnings or turn those warnings into errors so that you can fail in CI during validation time. The other part of this was the other key thing that we accomplished over the last year is getting really high quality functional testing done on a nightly basis across the 3 main cloud providers that Custodian supports. To do that, we created a project called the PyTest Terraform. It's also available within the Cloud Custodian GitHub organization. I think it's usable independently from Cloud Custodian itself. It's really just tight integration with the PyTest testing framework, which Custodian uses to enable provisioning resources and infrastructure in the different cloud providers, and then validating that the policies, that Custodian policies effectively find and detect and remediate appropriately. Next slide. So looking across the different cloud providers and sort of covering off some of the things that have happened over the last year, I mean, a lot of Cloud Custodian is about giving you that really high fidelity, rich capability around the underlying cloud providers. So being able to address new resources, being able to use new execution modes and new native capabilities around those cloud providers. And so a large portion of this ends up being, how do we keep up with the cloud providers? So there's a certain amount of business as usual with regards to adding 20 new resources for AWS, several new actions and filters, but also it's worth highlighting a few key ones. For people doing operations with Cloud Custodian, the ability to do quota management using the new AWS Service Quotas feature is a new key capability, as well as the network firewall resource. And then internally to Cloud Custodian, we were also able to do some normalization around the different KMS filters that we have across different resources to make them look the same on the outside for writing policies, as well as clean up some of the internals to be common across those different implementations, across those different resources. Next slide. Moving on to Azure, we have added Azure Advisor support thanks to Citrix, and added support for a few new resources. And then looking forward to 2022, so Cloud Custodian also supports being able to query resources from different sources, be that AWS config or Azure Resource Graph. And in this case, for Azure, we actually want to switch to the Azure Resource Graph as the default data source for custodian policies. This is after observing that the Azure console itself actually uses that for its default source. So very up to date and very scalable. And then looking forward to doing additional Azure Security Center integrations. And then we've noticed that the Custodian can drive a lot of serverless functions. Each policy provisions a separate function in the different cloud serverless runtimes. But in Azure, that doesn't really map well to the native capabilities of their serverless runtime. So we're going to look at potentially revisiting that. And then the Azure SDK itself also drives a lot of size issues just because they carry additional versions for every historical version. We wanted to look at seeing if we can actually reduce the size of our Docker images significantly by stripping some of those older versions that are no longer in use around the SDKs. Moving on to GCP. We've gotten a couple of really cool features this year. One was contributed by Premise Data around the metrics filter. This is a key aspect of being able to drive cost utilization policies, being able to see resources that are underutilized or don't have any connections. And so that applies to a bunch of different resources. And then adding a new source for querying resources, from being able to actually use Cloud Asset Inventory to directly query resources. And then as part of our integration with Google Cloud Security Command Center, we're actually now able to provision serverless functions that respond as new findings are generated inside of Google's Cloud Security Command Center. Finally, we've added hierarchical project management support. This was in response to a particular user's need around really managing labels, let's say, at an organization that was using GCP at scale with 50,000 projects and deep levels of hierarchy and nesting, being able to apply labels at the upper levels of the hierarchy and have it propagate down to some of the projects that were further down in the hierarchy. And so that's been tested at scale and provides a really excellent experience for the people that want to sort of get billing tags and labels out to large organizations and have it propagate down. We've added a few new filters and actions across the different resources that we have today. Moving on to some of the tool ecosystem. So Cloud Custodian has a rich ecosystem of different tools that can help with particular operational needs around different providers. And it also is where we also store some of our newer providers. In this case, we had a contribution out of China for an entire OpenStack provider, and that supports 5 resources and allows for writing custodian policies against OpenStack. If there's any other people that are interested in OpenStack, we definitely encourage you to come check it out and contribute or request new features. We've also been able to revamp our CI/CD system. It was taking about 10 minutes every time you pushed a PR. This is really about developer efficiency and quality of life. We've been able to reduce that to about 2 minutes now, just through some intelligent use of caching and revamping some of our GitHub actions. For users of C7N.org, which is our tool for dealing with large multi-account or multi-subscription or multi-project policies, there's an ancillary capability of being able to run an arbitrary script, be it Terraform or the native Cloud CLI, against all of those different projects or accounts. And that now works against Azure and GCP. As part of rounding out and helping onboard new contributors, we've created separate contribution guides that walk through creating a new resource or new filter in action and how to write tests for that as part of submitting to a new PR contribution. So really looking forward to seeing what new contributions we get from the community. Moving on to the next slide. If we look forward to 2022, one of the, I think the key things we were looking to do is take the GCP, the beta label off GCP. As part of doing that, we're going to be adding in mailer support inside of C7 mailer for being deployed into the GCP provider, as well as the MUGC support, which is what helps sort of clean up some of the serverless functions for policies that are no longer extant. And then finally adding blob support so that for Google Cloud Storage for policy execution output to go directly to storage. And then additionally, looking at AWS, obviously, keeping up with all of the stream of releases and new capabilities is just a key part and parcel of business as usual for the project. But then looking particularly at creating automatic layers for Lambda policies that are executing in AWS. There's been numerous issues with policies, the default SDKs inside of the Lambda runtime, not necessarily reflecting all the latest and greatest resources that are there. So this would be Custodian creating an automatic layer with the latest SDK so that is no longer an issue. And then looking at how we distribute, we're looking at also now publishing Docker Graviton images, Docker AARch64 images for people that are running inside on ARM hardware. This is really about just, for the different providers that support ARM64 that offer typically a significantly better cost performance ratio. So looking forward to that. And then as part of that, we're also looking at potentially slimming down some of the size of the images. This was in conjunction with some of that Azure SDK stripping against historical versions. And then finally, for the benefit of all providers, is we're looking at pulling out the Cloud Custodian core interfaces and code into a separate package from the main C7M package. This is just to facilitate better interop with the different providers without having to have a hard dependency on some of the AWS SDKs themselves. Moving on. If we look at some of our big ticket items, Custodian has sort of Kubernetes support today, but it's really pull-based, and that's not really sufficient for what we consider to be our gold standard, which is being able to do that real-time enforcement around the different provider capabilities and policy enforcement. So we're looking at adding a Kubernetes admission controller, which will be able to then actually at runtime, pre-deployment of a resource, being able to validate that those resources are compliant with the organization policy. And then finally, in terms of improving developer experience, being able to move some of this policy enforcement against resources that are already deployed or being deployed to resources that are earlier in the pipeline. So being able to evaluate infrastructure as code assets like Terraform and CloudFormation and evaluate policies directly against them. And then finally, being able to have a richer policy testing framework and tool. And there's a link to a spec here, which is several pages long and covers sort of in great detail what we're trying to do with regards to enabling policy authors to also write tests alongside their policies that can be validated as part of the CI for that policy itself.
And I'm just going to quickly go over some of our community plans for 2022. We started to do monthly workshops, Cloud Custodian 101, where it's an open event to anyone in the community that they can come sit, register for free. And we do it every month. And we have a rotating set of instructors that are doing that. So we're going to go ahead and fire those up again come November. And we'll make sure that we announce through the usual channels so that you can participate there. We're also hoping to do more days like today around conferences, around KubeCon, around reInvent, and any other large events and shows where Custodian users are. So we're definitely looking forward to having an event calendar and things like that for this calendar year. We've also started doing bi-weekly community meetings. There's a link there for you to follow through. And this has become kind of our 2-week checkpoint This meeting is open to everyone in the public. We make announcements on the mailing list. We take notes. We have an agenda. One of the nice things that we do is those of you that are talking in chat about doing PRs or filing issues, we go ahead and use that meeting as a high bandwidth area where we can discuss kind of more nuanced technical issues like that. So there's been cases where we've grabbed an issue that's confused some people on GitHub, and then we've gone through the actual issue and recorded it on the video and put it on YouTube, and then linked to it from the GitHub issue. So our goal there is over the course of the next year, all of this expertise that the community is learning about how to use Cloud Custodian, or maybe give us feedback on features. We'll go ahead and building up that corpus of expertise that anyone in the community can look through that year's worth of notes or through videos and be able to use that in order to get what they need done. We've also started doing regular community sprints. So right now on Fridays, Liz and I, and Carl stops by every once in a while, we'll pick something in the documentation that bothers someone, or if we see an issue, someone maybe got confused on how some of the documentation might be written, we go ahead and take an hour a week to just find things that are annoying people, and then we go fix them, and then we do this kind of live in front of everyone. So if you've ever interested, if you see something in the docs that you want to fix, or maybe you haven't contributed to an open source project before and you're looking for a safe place to kind of have someone walk you through it, we're more than happy to do that with whoever shows up. This has resulted in some improvements in documentation. And then lastly, we're going to work with the CNCF on removing a lot of the friction when you submit a PR to the project, as far as doing all that kind of due diligence paperwork. And lastly, for real cooler Cloud Custodian branded swag, like the t-shirt that Kapil's wearing, we want to make sure that we're getting you all the latest goodies so that we can keep up with all the other great CNCF projects that are having that really nice swag. And speaking of CNCF, just a quick status here. So Cloud Custodian is in the CNCF sandbox. It's currently going through the security process, which we've had to pause to do KubeCon, and that process will resume in earnest right after we're done with the event here this week. We are working towards getting CNCF incubation status. If you've heard of me before, I've been a CNCF ambassador and has worked with a lot of cloud with CNCF ecosystem projects in the past, and that's one of the things that kind of brought me to this project, is to help do what I can to make this process easy. One of the nice things I like about Cloud Native, and probably one of the reasons you're here at KubeCon, is a lot of shared expertise between all of the projects, and that is something that we are striving to do. So hopefully we'll have some news by next KubeCon, but don't quote us on that quite yet, but we'll see. And lastly, we do have a community survey that we're running. We've started running these on the regulars. Like you said, we have GitHub, we have PRs, we have chat and things like that. And this is just another avenue for you as users to let us know how you're using Custodian, possible pain points, so that we can figure out what works well and what needs to be fixed. And with that, that's pretty much the state of the Cloud Custodian community. Kapil, do you have any closing comments?
No, I'm really, again, super excited that all of you are able to join us today, and looking forward to the great lineup of speakers that we have coming. If you have questions or you want to get engaged, come check us out on GitHub or join the Gitter channel.
Yeah. And lastly, we should have probably said this during the intro. All of the sessions and things like that will be recorded, and we'll be putting them on the YouTube channel and published through all the usual channels. So if you go ahead and click on the Gitter link there on that slide and join in chat. Throughout the week, I'm constantly posting new updates and things like that. And we also have a Google group, which I'll make sure we add to the slide deck before we publish. Anybody else? Any comments from the chat? Umair?